you for work?
I'm a congresswoman. I represent Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. Well, right now the President of the United States is trying to bully me and send me back to Somalia, so I feel a little pressure.
Really?
But he's messing with the wrong one because I have the backing of the wonderful people of Minnesota who elected me to represent them.
Got you. Sounds good. And what's your nationality? Where you're from, by the way?
I was originally born in Somalia, left when I was 8, and came to the U.S. when I was 12.
God.
Ilhan Omar and the group. You know, I met the head of Somalia. Did you know that? And I suggested that maybe he'd like to take her back, and he didn't want her. He said, I don't want her. Okay, what else?
Omars were brought or came to America under a refugee program. It gave them special ability to enter the U.S. and to have their pathway to citizenship. And that was presuming that they were not serving in the military or the genocidal military of the country which they came from. It turns out that that was actually the case. This was something that was buried by the so-called fact-checking industry and the mainstream media. They called it misinformation. They called it an anti-Muslim smear. But the reality is that Ilhan Omar's father was a colonel in the Siad Barre regime, is a Marxist-Leninist regime responsible for genocide of a neighboring tribe, and he was a senior official in that very regime.
And yet he denied association with that government and claimed he was trying to escape it.
He cast himself as a so-called teacher trainer. This was the term that kept coming up. I've never heard this term before, teacher trainer. Sometimes it was educator, and it was denied by him. It was a idea that was spread by her as well. But most of the heavy lifting was done by Snopes, the, again, so-called fact-checking website. They relied on some very obscure Minnesotan outlet whose own reporter that made this claim was later sued for misreporting, and that claim became the basis for this entire notion that what they had said was misinformation, that in fact he was a colonel in the Siad Barre regime and not a so-called teacher trainer as she and the rest of the media claimed. The irony of this entire story is that the evidence that he was actually a colonel in the regime came from the Somali American community itself. So Mr. Omar died in 2020 of complications from COVID. And right after he died, there were a lot of obituaries in local Somali language and English language outlets in Minnesota claiming and celebrating the fact that he was a colonel in the regime. They were not ashamed of it. They thought this was something to be proud of. And they wrote these obituaries detailing his service in the Barre regime as a colonel, detailing how he climbed the ranks within the military, detailing his service in various wars under the Barre regime. And eventually this became so overwhelming. It was reported by a number of outlets in the US as well as in Africa reporting the same information. So what the New York Times and CNN and CBC and the rest of them got wrong, small outlets in the United States who did not have the same agenda were reporting actually truthfully. And that local outlet was written, that story for that local outlet was written by a reporter who was almost sycophantic in his praise and his effusive adoration for Ilhan Omar as this like rising left-wing figure in politics and young and diverse and DEI and all this stuff. And that same reporter was the one who was later sued for a number of misrepresentations. That outlet had to settle that lawsuit. It was the same guy who made these claims. Snopes never mentioned that fact. They didn't investigate that at all, even though it was publicly available information. They just had their claim, calling this misinformation, attaching it to so-called Islamophobia, when in reality it was true. And then what happened is you had this cascade from Snopes. You had PolitiFact making the same claim based on the Snopes claim, based on that one article by this local City Pages Minnesotan outlet. Then Reuters makes the claim, then the New York Times makes the claim, then the networks make the claim. And by that point, if you dare to contradict it, if you dare to even look into it, you get cast as being Islamophobic, as somehow having this misinformation agenda against Muslim people in America. And this is something that clearly warrants further investigation, because if this all bears out and we have the evidence, we now know that this is actually the case. And the other twist here is that I don't think this is the end of the story regarding her father. I still think there's more out there. I'm working on it right now. I'm hunting down the facts, but I don't think it ends with the so-called his just being a colonel. I think there was much more going on. what we need right now is a proper investigation by the government. This cannot be trusted in the hands of the mainstream media because they're not going to do the job. Still today, they're going to run cover for Ilhan Omar. So we really need a DOJ investigation to understand exactly what happened, what was put on that immigration application, and what the reality was, and whether that broke the law. I would imagine so, and I would imagine that these documents are readily available to anyone who wants to look into this. But again, this was kind of all it was all just kind of cast under this cloud of Islamophobia, so nobody wanted to touch it. It became toxic and radioactive. And at the time, we remember Ilhan Omar herself was serving on the House Intelligence Committee, and she was thrown off the committee. And that's how bad things got for her right around this period. And it was a lot about her making anti-Semitic remarks, but it was also tied to some of this stuff going on in the background. And again, we don't fully know the truth yet, and I think there's much more to come. But all this stuff, especially being kicked off of that committee, it really signals that there is something serious going on here. It was a dictatorship, as they generally are, the Marxist-Leninists, and it was extremely repressive, extremely poor, impoverished. But one thing that some other researchers have noted is that in Ilhan Omar's own description of her life there, she talks about living in a compound. She talks about having a car, which was extremely rare at that time. This, for her personally, was actually a life of privilege and power, which obviously accords with the notion that her father was a senior military official in the regime. That's how people within those regimes are treated. They're not treated like everybody else. So she wouldn't have borne the brunt of what the rest of the people living under that repressive rule would have had to endure day to day. She lived a good life, and it's probably only because Siad Barre lost power that they had to flee, because they no longer had the cushy lifestyle. They didn't have the political protection, and it was time to go. They positioned this as them being under threat from this general upheaval, but it was the upheaval caused by the man her father was serving. It was right up until around 1991 that the Barre regime was in power, and it was the civil war that brought it down. And like in any other case, if you are part of the regime that has just fallen, your number one priority is to get yourself and your family out the country. And the other thing to keep in mind is that not anyone could just leave the country. You would have to have significant means, political connections, and a lot of know-how to be able to pull something like that off. This is an extremely poor country. This is, as you said at the beginning of this, one of the poorest countries in the world. There's not infrastructure. There's not embassies that you can just go and apply for a visa or refugee status to another country. And that would have taken significant political influence to pull off, which they clearly had. So again, we see Ilhan Omar, though she positions herself as a victim of this, in reality, she was part of the very regime that was coordinating and organizing all this. And it's exactly that allowed her to flee to the United States to seek shelter and create a new life, and to become a congresswoman within no generations, within the same generation that she arrived in the United States. The truth is that Ilhan Omar is an extremely skilled operator. She's very good at casting a narrative that she wants. She probably learned that from her father, is my guess. And she's always been able to manipulate the media and to bring out the Islamophobia card. And though today that's kind of worn out a little bit, we're talking about a time frame of around 2016, 2017, 2018, when it was very much in vogue, and any kind of mention of that kind of terminology would just shut down any kind of discussion. And she knew that, and she used that to her advantage in an extremely savvy way, and in a way that is very skilled.
This is just a political football, and they're using our communities and people who look like me as leverage. I would say our country should be more fearful of white men across our country, because they are actually causing most of the deaths within this country. And so if fear was the driving force of policies to keep America safe, Americans safe inside of this country, you know, it just goes to show what happens when you have segments within communities that are using fear and hate innate to mobilize their base, and it is important for us to actually have a conversation about what kind of communities we are trying to build and what this nation actually stands for.
Again, this is very programmatic. I don't think this is her just kind of speaking off the cuff. I think this is all part of a extended, entrenched propaganda campaign that's designed to do exactly this, to invert the values of the United States and to destabilize. And it's not a coincidence. She said this on Al Jazeera, which is a network that is effectively owned and controlled by the Qatari government. The recent director, this equivalent of a CEO, is a member of the royal family of Qatar, who are aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. And it is the Muslim Brotherhood who is mostly responsible for pushing exactly these messages. They've aligned with the Marxists because it suits their agenda. It's extremely effective. It's extremely toxic. For some reason, academia eats it up and just gloms onto it. And this is where we are today. It's very hard to fight this stuff because they're extremely savvy. They don't see truth as an anchor or as a consideration in any regard. It's all about advancing the narrative, in this case, a Muslim Brotherhood narrative, and it's working. This is the worst part about it, is that it's effective.
That's all for today. Thank you. If you want global news to keep you up to date on any new developments, please subscribe our channel and forward our content with your friends on social media and email. Thank you very much for keep supporting me. Stay safe, be blessed. Namaste.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.